The janitor's name was Martin Reyes. He was 56 years old, short, quiet, and moved like a man who'd been cleaning hallways his whole life. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., Martin walked into the lobby of Venturi's Global Holdings, a towering corporate firm in downtown Chicago, and began his day. He mopped floors, emptied trash bins, wiped glass doors. No one said much to him. They walked past him like he was part of the furniture. Some offered him a tight smile. Some didn't look up from their phones. He never minded, or at least never showed it. Martin wasn't there to be noticed. He was there to work. And he did that work without complaint. Quietly, efficiently, with the pride of a man who still believed in doing a job right, even when no one's watching. But Martin had a secret, one that no resume ever listed, one that no HR department ever asked, one that could change the way the entire building looked at him, if they ever took the time to find out. And that secret? Martin Reyes spoke 9 languages fluently. Not broken phrases. Not tourist-level vocab. Full. Conversational. Professional. Fluent. But no one knew. Until one day, everything changed. It started on a Monday. A cold one. The kind of morning where the Chicago wind felt like knives through your coat. Martin was scrubbing down the marble lobby floors when the revolving doors creaked open at 5:13 a.m., nearly 2 hours before anyone usually arrived. In walked Thomas Blake, CEO of Venturi's. 6'2", tailored suit, Bluetooth in his ear, eyes glued to his tablet. He was muttering something, irritated, pace fast, head down. He didn't even see Martin at first. But then Blake dropped something. Papers from his leather folio scattered across the polished floor. Martin, without hesitation, bent to help. Blake muttered, "Thanks." Barely looked at him. Then he groaned again, this time louder, frustrated. He was trying to make a translation app on his phone work. "Damn thing won't convert French correctly," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. And that was the moment, that quiet, overlooked moment. Martin, still kneeling, looked up and said, in perfect French, "Excuse me, sir, but your app is misinterpreting the context. That phrase means management forecast, not market projection." Blake froze. He blinked, looked down at Martin like he'd just witnessed a janitor quote Shakespeare. "You speak French?" he asked. Martin stood up slowly, nodded. "Oui, monsieur. Et aussi l'espagnol, l'allemand, l'arabe, le russe, le mandarin, le japonais, le portugais et l'Italian." "Yes, sir. And also Spanish, German, Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, Portuguese, and Italian." Blake stared, not because he didn't believe it, but because Martin hadn't even paused. No accent, no hesitation, no brag, just truth. What happened next was unexpected. Blake didn't just say, "Thank you," and move on. He asked Martin to stay right there. Then he pulled out his phone, not for translation, but for video. He asked Martin to say something in all 9 languages. A simple sentence. "My name is Martin. I work here, and I believe language connects people." One by one, Martin spoke. Seamless transitions. Effortless pronunciation. Blake posted the video on LinkedIn. A quick caption. "Meet Martin, our overnight janitor. He speaks 9 languages fluently." I almost walked past that brilliance without noticing. By noon, the video had over 500,000 views. By that night, it passed 1.8 million. People didn't just share it, they reacted. Emotionally. How many Martins are we walking past every day? Why do we assume janitors aren't geniuses? This man should be running the building, not cleaning it. But the most important reactions weren't online. They happened inside that office. By the following morning, the tone inside Venturi's Global Holdings had changed. People who never glanced twice at Martin were now looking at him, really looking, not with disgust, not with pity, with curiosity, with wonder, with a new discomfort, because now they knew that the man pushing the mop bucket at 6 a.m. might know more than them, might understand more than their college-educated degrees ever taught them, might speak more to the world than the CEO himself. Martin never asked for the attention. He never changed his uniform. He didn't walk slower or speak louder. He was still there before dawn, still folding paper towels into perfect triangles in the restrooms, still wiping down the chrome with precision. But now, wherever he walked, whispers followed. That's him, right? He speaks Russian too? Why is he still a janitor? They all asked the question. None asked him directly, except for one person, Lana Miller. She was an intern, barely 22, studying international relations and fluent in one language, English. She approached Martine respectfully. Sir, I saw the video. I just wanted to say you're incredible. Martine looked at her, smiled kindly. I'm not incredible. I'm just not invisible anymore. By the end of the week, CEO Thomas Blake had seen enough. The viral video had brought in more than comments. Clients called. Recruiters called. Even foreign dignitaries called, asking who the multilingual janitor was. Blake invited Martine to the executive floor, not to clean, but to sit. For the first time in 17 years of working at Venturi's, Martine took the elevator past floor 12. He was offered coffee, a seat, and a job interview he never applied for. Blake leaned forward and said, You don't belong pushing mops, Martine. You belong with our international communications team. But Martine shook his head. I belong where I'm needed and where I'm respected. Blake blinked. You don't want a promotion? Martine paused. I want opportunity, not charity, not a token seat at the table. If you're offering me a role, let it be because you see my value, not because you feel guilty. Blake nodded slowly. He'd expected gratitude. Instead, he got honesty. And it hit him harder than any viral comment ever could. 1 week later, Martine started a new position, not because of pity, but because the language team needed him. He began overseeing translations for major clients, French tech firms, Mandarin-speaking partners, Portuguese legal files. And still, he came to work early. He still greeted the custodial crew by name. He still ate lunch alone, quietly, in the break room, unless someone sat beside him first. But slowly, things changed. Employees started greeting each other in different languages. Language workshops started in the evenings. Posters went up celebrating multilingualism. And at the heart of it all was a man no one saw until the CEO stopped to listen. Martine never chased a spotlight, but his brilliance lit the way anyway. By the time Martine Reyes began his new role in international communications, everyone in the company knew his name. But what they didn't know, what none of them had ever cared to ask, was where he came from. Because Martine hadn't just learned 9 languages on YouTube or through apps. He'd lived them. Martine was born in Guatemala. At age 9, he fled with his mother during the Civil War. They crossed through Mexico, lived in shelters, and eventually arrived in Los Angeles. At 13, Martine worked night shifts to help his mother clean office buildings. By 18, he was fluent in Spanish and English. But then he joined the military, not for adventure, but for survival. He served in intelligence. He translated enemy transmissions. He debriefed foreign nationals. He spent years posted in embassies across Europe and Asia. German, Arabic, Mandarin, French, Russian. He learned them all not for fun, but because it was life or death. He was honorably discharged after 12 years. But the medals didn't help him when he came home. No one cared about languages on a janitor's application. No one asked why he knew so much. They just saw a brown man with a mop and assumed that was all there was. Martine didn't correct them. He just worked. Because to him, the uniform didn't define the value of a man. His work did. While Martine's rise inspired many, it threatened others. Inside Venturi's, there were whispers, again, but this time they were sharper. He's only there because of that viral video. I've worked here 10 years and didn't get that offer. Now we're giving janitors executive jobs. The resentment wasn't about Martine's skills. It was about their own egos. And one man, in particular, couldn't let it go. Ethan Granger, senior language consultant. He had a master's degree, a PhD on the wall, and he'd only ever spoken 4 languages fluently. He confronted Martine one afternoon, not publicly, but with poison in his voice. "Enjoy your little fairy tale while it lasts," he said. "You don't belong up here. You didn't earn this the right way." Martine didn't raise his voice. He just stared at him for a moment. Then he spoke to Ethan in fluent Latin, the root of every Romance language Ethan had ever studied. Tempus omnia revelat. Time reveals everything. He walked away, and Ethan never spoke to him again. The story didn't stop with Venturi's. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Martine was invited to speak on a panel for multilingual equity in the workforce. CNN, NPR, The Washington Post. They all came knocking. People were hungry for something real, something inspiring that wasn't soaked in politics or scandal. Martine sat on stage next to CEOs, professors, and politicians, but he didn't wear a suit. He wore his old janitor's uniform, not for pity, for power. He looked out at the crowd and said, "This uniform made me invisible until someone listened, but I was always here, always capable, always valuable. Language isn't just speech, it's story, culture, humanity, and brilliance doesn't only live in offices or ivory towers. Sometimes it walks with a mop. Sometimes it rides a bus before sunrise. But it's there, and if you stop assuming, you might just see it." The audience rose to their feet, not for a janitor, not for a viral sensation, but for a man who reminded them of something they'd forgotten, that intelligence, dignity, and potential wear many uniforms. 2 weeks after the panel, an envelope arrived at Martine's modest apartment. It wasn't from a recruiter or a corporate office this time. It was embossed, elegant, official. Inside was a formal invitation to the White House Language Access Summit. The message was brief. "Mr. Reyes, your story has become a beacon. We would be honored to hear your voice at the national level." Martine sat at his kitchen table in silence. The same table he had eaten beans and rice at for years. The same table where unpaid bills used to stack up. He looked at the envelope again, then smiled, but not for the glory, for the message it sent to every immigrant, every janitor, every overlooked genius across the country. When Martine stepped up to speak at the Language Access Summit, he didn't stand behind the podium. He stood beside it, plain shirt, no script, and he told his truth. America speaks more than English. We are a nation built by tongues the world once tried to silence. I was told I'd never be more than a cleaner. I was told that accents made you weak. But every language I learned, every one, made me stronger." He paused, looked into the crowd of politicians, diplomats, and corporate leaders. "Stop asking people where they come from. Start asking them what they know. You'll be surprised how many leaders are scrubbing your floors." The room erupted, not out of politeness, but because they knew they had ignored brilliance like his for far too long. Back at Venturi's Global Holdings, Martine's rise sparked more than just hallway chatter. The company launched a new program called Voice Power, designed to find and promote multilingual and multicultural talent inside its own walls. No more overlooking resumes based on zip codes. No more assuming janitors didn't know Java or accountants couldn't speak Arabic. And it started with internal interviews. The first candidate? A cafeteria cook who spoke 5 languages and had an MBA from Columbia. No one ever asked him, until now. Within 3 months, the initiative expanded. Receptionists became client liaisons. Warehouse staff became language trainers. And all of it because of one man who simply did his job without expecting applause. Until the day the world finally clapped. But as always, not everyone was on board. Certain executives still muttered under their breath, "He's just lucky. This won't last. It's a diversity stunt." But the data said otherwise. Productivity climbed. Client satisfaction rose. Employee turnover dropped by 30%. Venturi's didn't just look better on paper. It was better because it finally realized what Martine had always known. Talent isn't always loud. It's often quiet, humble, dressed in overalls. And when you finally open the door to it, it doesn't just change one man's life. It changes the culture of an entire company. Months after the world had come to know Martine Reyes as the multilingual janitor turned global voice, he took a quiet trip back to where his journey had started, not to speak at another panel, not to shake hands or sign autographs, but to walk the cracked sidewalks of his old neighborhood in South Central Los Angeles. The same streets where he once dodged gang recruiters, where he studied under a flickering lamp, whispering French verbs to himself while sirens screamed outside. He visited his old middle school, the place where, at 13, a teacher told him he'd never amount to anything beyond manual labor. Martine walked through those halls, now repainted but still familiar. He stopped outside room 208, his old ESL classroom. The door was open. Inside, a new generation of immigrant kids sat huddled around worksheets, repeating English phrases. Their eyes darted up when Martine entered. He smiled, didn't say much, just looked at the whiteboard, where someone had written, "Language is power." "They told me I'd never get out of here," Martine said softly. "But language took me farther than I ever imagined." The teacher invited him to speak, and for the next hour, Martine stood in front of those students, not as a guest, but as living proof. Proof that struggle wasn't a sentence, that knowledge couldn't be mopped away, and that speaking more than one language wasn't a curse. It was a crown. As he left the school, a man in his 60s approached him from the parking lot. Wrinkled face, graying hair, a suit that didn't quite fit. "Martine," the man said, "I'm Mr. Daly, your old principal." Martine recognized him. This was the man who suspended him for talking back in Spanish. The same man who once told his mother, "If he doesn't assimilate, he'll never succeed here." Daly looked uncomfortable, holding something in his hand. "I saw you on TV," he said quietly. "I was wrong. About you. About a lot of things. I'm sorry." Martine didn't smile, didn't offer quick forgiveness. He simply nodded. "I made peace with that version of you a long time ago," he said. "But thank you." Daly handed him a photo of Martine's old 8th grade class, back when he was the only student who didn't speak English. He folded it once, gently, and tucked it in his coat. Some apologies come decades late, but Martine didn't need the man's guilt. He had already found his purpose. Back at Venturi's, Martine had a new title, Director of Global Cultural Integration, but that title didn't change him. He still rode the bus sometimes, still greeted the janitorial crew by name, still mentored interns who came from backgrounds like his. The walls of his office had no degrees, no awards, just one framed quote, printed in bold. Fluency isn't just speech. It's survival, it's story, it's soul. Martine launched a language training program for underserved employees. He traveled to community colleges, offering workshops on how to turn multilingualism into a career asset. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be a bridge. And he was to immigrants, to veterans, to anyone who ever thought their voice wasn't worth hearing. It started with a simple envelope, white, international postage, no return address. It arrived at the corporate offices of Venturi's, addressed directly to Martine Reyes. When he opened it, the letter was handwritten in 3 languages, French, Arabic, and German. It was from a young woman in Morocco. Her name was Amina. She had seen Martine's speech from the Language Access Summit, dubbed and circulating online. "I am a cleaner at a hotel," she wrote. "I speak 5 languages. I have tried to apply for better work, but they say I do not fit the image. But when I saw your face, I cried. You look like my brother. You speak like my father. You made me believe I am not invisible." Martine read the letter 3 times. He folded it carefully and placed it beside the photo of his old 8th grade class on his desk. That moment struck deeper than any award, because now he knew the story had left the country, and the world was finally starting to listen. What began as a viral moment had become something bigger. International companies started reevaluating hiring practices. Language wasn't just a nice-to-have skill anymore. It was now considered essential to global business. Venturi's, under Martine's leadership, launched Linguarize, a multinational initiative to recognize multilingual workers around the world, especially in labor sectors. Martine traveled to Seoul, Sao Paulo, Nairobi, and Madrid. At each stop, he met cleaners, drivers, warehouse workers, many of whom spoke more than 3 languages. Most had never put that on a resume, No one had ever told them it mattered, but now it did. And Martine didn't speak to them in English. He spoke in their languages, because he knew how it felt to be understood for the first time. Not everyone celebrated Martine's influence. A major shareholder meeting at Venturi's turned tense when a few board members raised concerns. We've moved too fast. Is this really about business or just a political statement? Why is our director of cultural integration getting global press like a celebrity? But before the CEO could answer, Martine stood up. Calm, direct. This isn't politics, he said. This is profit. This is purpose. Multilingual employees reduce error, increase client trust, and solve problems faster. And if you're threatened by recognition going someone who used to scrub your floors, then maybe it's not about the business. It's about your ego. Silence. Then applause. Not from everyone, but from enough. Because what Martine had built wasn't based on trends. It was built on truth, and that was unshakable. By the end of that year, Martine Reyes was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. Not for being a CEO, not for being an executive, but for breaking the illusion that brilliance comes dressed in tailored suits or speaks with elite accents. He was invited to the United Nations to help develop global language equity guidelines. He gave TED Talks in 6 different languages, and in every speech, he repeated the same message. The world is multilingual. Our workplaces should be too. And until we stop hiring accents and start hiring ability, we will never see the full genius that walks among us. It came as a shock to the company, the media, and even Martine's closest allies. At the height of his influence, with his name echoing in boardrooms and classrooms around the globe, Martine Reyes announced his retirement. He made no long speech, no press conference, just a handwritten note to the CEO. I've never worked for applause. I've worked for access. Now that others are walking through doors I once had to clean to open, I know my job is done. His inbox flooded. Calls from news anchors, emails from nonprofits, messages from fellow employees who felt like they were losing a symbol of hope. But Martine wasn't disappearing. He was just stepping out of the spotlight to make room for others who had once been in the shadows. A week after Martine's departure, Venturi's hosted a quiet, private transition ceremony. The position of Director of Global Cultural Integration would now be filled by someone Martine himself had mentored. Her name was Nalia Yusuf, a Somali refugee, single mother, and former customer service rep fluent in 5 languages. She had worked nights and weekends while raising her daughter, never asking for recognition. Martine had noticed her not because of what she said in meetings, but because of how she listened, because of the way she translated frustration into calm for clients on every continent. She doesn't just speak languages, Martine said. She speaks people. When Nalia took the podium, she wore a traditional hijab, no makeup, no corporate polish, just presence, realness, and in her speech, she didn't talk about herself. This role was never supposed to exist, she said, but because it does, I plan to make sure it never disappears. Applause didn't just echo through the building. It echoed across every office around the world, where workers who had never seen someone like them in power finally saw it happen. Martine moved to a small coastal town. No high-rises, no boardroom meetings, just sea breeze and books. He started volunteering at a local library, offering free language tutoring to immigrants and elderly residents. He lived simply. No fanfare, no press. People in the town didn't know. They were living next to someone who had shifted the tide of corporate diversity across the globe, and Martine preferred it that way. Every Friday evening, he sat at a park bench with a small notepad, sketching out ideas for a book, a memoir, perhaps, or maybe just a collection of stories from the people he met along the way. He titled the first page, Voices We Never Heard. A year later, at the very headquarters where Martine had once polished floors, a statue was erected in the central plaza, not made of bronze, not a polished bust, but a humble sculpture, a worn mop rested beside a stack of books, each titled in a different language. No plaque bearing his name, just 5 simple words carved into the base. Fluency is found in dignity. Visitors stopped. Some cried. Others simply stood in silence. But every single one of them left changed. Because it wasn't just a monument to a man. It was a reminder to see the people they passed by every day. Years passed. Trends changed. Boardrooms filled with new faces. Corporations launched fresh campaigns. New tech, new goals, new buzzwords. But one thing remained. One ripple that had become a wave. Carried from corner offices to cafeterias across the world. The idea that brilliance speaks in many voices. Language inclusion became standard. Multilingual training programs grew from rare offerings to required development tracks. No longer were resumes filtered by accent or country of origin. Companies that once were behind phrases like culture fit were now rethinking what culture actually meant. And every time someone questioned whether a janitor could be a leader or whether an immigrant worker's voice mattered in policy, someone, somewhere would whisper, "Remember Martin Reyes." In schools across the country, students who once had their mother tongue out of fear of being bullied were now being encouraged to speak it. Teachers began assigning essays on linguistic identity. Multilingual debate clubs popped up, and kids who grew up translating bills for their parents were suddenly celebrated for being linguistic athletes. In one high school in Chicago, a teacher began the year with a new mantra. Every language you speak is another set of keys, and those keys unlock doors others can't even see. At the back of that classroom, a shy kid named Luis, who had once been teased for mixing Spanish and English, stood a little taller, because now his voice mattered. CEOs who once prided themselves on efficiency and sameness began hiring based on cultural dexterity. Global branches of major corporations appointed language equity officers. In Tokyo, Berlin, Lagos, Toronto, executives started asking the same question at every hiring summit. Are we only hearing from the loudest voices or the most diverse ones? The name Martin Reyes came up at conferences not as a sentimental story, but as a case study in how undervalued talent could transform billion-dollar enterprises. And still, his photo never hung in any boardroom, because Martin had asked that no corporate office ever display his image. "I'm not a brand," he'd said. "I'm just a man who didn't let silence define me." Nalia Yusuf, the woman who took Martin's place at Venturi's, launched a Global Fluency Fund, offering scholarships to multilingual workers seeking education and promotion in fields where they'd long been shut out. The fund helped cleaners become consultants, delivery drivers become diplomats, refugees become researchers, and every recipient wrote a letter to the man who started it all. Some were in Korean, some in Russian, others in Swahili, Urdu, Haitian Creole. They all began the same way. "You heard us," before anyone else did. In a rare podcast interview, recorded shortly before his passing, Martin Reyes was asked one final question. If you could say one thing to the version of yourself mopping those floors years ago, what would it be? Martin paused for a long time, then smiled softly. "I'd say, keep whispering those languages. They'll become your thunder." And so he passed quietly like he lived, not with headlines or fanfare, but with his legacy echoing in every hallway, every accent, every overlooked genius still waiting to be heard. Martin Reyes proved that no title, no salary, no uniform can define human potential. He proved that janitors can lead revolutions. He proved that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one no one saw coming. Like my video and subscribe to my channel for more daily videos.